D&D has never been more popular than it is right now, and that's why I talked to Mike Mearls about its place in pop culture, what makes it unique when you compare it to video games or films or comic books, that energy that exists around a table when you are sharing a story with your friends. For the most part, you must be very, very busy, working very hard to get books done, and dealing with a very creative team, but you have to have like a moment where you look in the mirror and you're like, oh my God, I work on D&D. Like this has to happen at some point.
I have those moments. Usually when I look in the mirror, I think, oh my God, I'm turning gray and I'm losing hair. Like I'm getting old. But no, there's a real sense, I think, in the D&D team that we're having a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but we're just genuinely, and I hope this is reflected in the products we're making. We have a lot of fun making these things because we get to, it's part of our job, not the entirety of our job. A lot of our job is doing the hard work of writing, creating, revising, polishing, refinishing, getting it done. But part of the job is this idea of sitting in a room and thinking, what is the story of Halaster? What's this guy up to? Why is he here? And combing through the canon, the back archive, and what's been said before. What story is this telling? And then what is interesting about this? And then you start asking a lot of questions, brainstorming. But I think the really interesting thing to me about Dungeons and Dragons right now is I feel that, I love to say this is all planned, but I mean, life is like half luck at least, right? But I think D&D has hit, kind of has having its moment again. It had its moment in the early 80s, right? Whether you had the cartoon, this idea of a role-playing game was completely new to people. But then I think with the video game crash of '83, I think we saw a similar decline in Dungeons and Dragons' fortunes. Gaming as a hobby kind of took a hit when people saw the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, as just like, whatever, this isn't something that, it was a fad, and it's going away. Arcades are going away. Games are for people who are nerdy enough to have a computer in their home, which in 1985 was weird, right? Like most homes did not have computers in them. And you needed to have some basic level of technical competency to manage having a computer in your home. And so I think D&D took a real hit then where it was starting to trend toward mainstream and a lot of factors pushed it back. I think what we're seeing now is D&D's branching back out into the mainstream, and we live in an era now where it isn't weird to have a computer in your home. Everyone has a computer. Everyone has a computer in the back pocket. Games are everywhere. They're ubiquitous. And our gaming literacy as a culture, in the Western world at least, and in many cultures globally, is advancing to the point where the concept of a tabletop role-playing game isn't really strange anymore. It might, to a lot of people, look like a natural outgrowth of the games they're already playing. Whether it's an MMO or even just a mobile game they're playing, like Clash of Clans, this idea of the storytelling game, against the backdrop of a world where comic, movies, fantasy, science fiction kind of led the way, in the 50s kind of figuring out what it was, and then the 60s getting kind of headier, more philosophical science fiction, then the 70s, really starting to as a cinematic force becoming more and more mainstream. We're going to see a science fiction movie in the 50s event, you're going to go see a movie about some, giant rubber-headed space alien, menacing some kids on the beach, right? Like it was whatever. And then the 60s, you started getting more like 2001, Clockwork Orange, like really heady, okay, now science fiction can tell serious stories, then kind of rebounding with Star Wars in the 70s to go, now we kind of come full circle. We got sort of the geeks interested in it and teenagers, and then we got college students and the intellectuals interested, and now we're getting mainstream America interested with Star Wars and Star Trek and science fiction's everywhere. And then I think comics and fantasy have followed a similar path of people now like this is just mainstream entertainment. It's just accepted, And so I think we have a world now where people are very gaming literate, much more than they used to be. So if role-playing isn't this incredibly daunting thing, it's still daunting, but it's nowhere near what it was. And fantasy is ubiquitous, and it's just part of our culture now. And those two things coming together, and I think the third part being the social aspect of Dungeons & Dragons. That this is a game, I remember doing this years ago. I went to PAX Prime or PAX West, whatever they call it these days, up in Seattle. And I made a point of walking around the show floor. And instead of looking at the games, all of the vendors, everyone has their giant screens up, and here's the game, here's our awesome new game. And the games are all really cool, there's some really good ones. Of course, I love video games. But I didn't pay any attention to the games. I watched the people playing the games. I made a point of going around and just watching what did people look like when they were playing the games. And the interesting thing to me was I didn't see a single person smiling. And I didn't see anyone laughing. Like, here are the big games, whatever year it was, 2008, 2009, I can't remember. But no one was laughing, no one was smiling. Everyone just had this very, like, focus. And you could tell, you know that. If you're a video game player, you know that's like when you're in the zone, right? You're in that moment. But it was interesting to me that it was so demanding, right? It's fun, it's pleasurable, it's very demanding. When you watch people playing D&D, you see something very different, right? You see people, it's social, it's funny, it's lighthearted, you're smiling, you're laughing. And I think as games have become more about PvP and more about, can you achieve this? Can you grind for this? Can you beat the super hard boss? Here's the really cool loot chest you can get if you can accomplish all these things. D&D really brings gaming back, I believe, to its roots of this is about relaxing. It's about being in a safe space in the sense of, you're fighting a dragon, but there's no threat to you. Really, just the question is, will we win? Will we beat the dragon? It's funny, it's engaging, it's social. I like to compare it to if you play Overwatch. I like playing Tracer in Overwatch, but I'm not very good. And in Overwatch, I have to if I want to do something interesting, I actually have to do it. If I make a little mistake, I'm ruined. In D&D, I just say, okay, I jump across the room, my gun's blazing, and just before the guy turns and shoots me, I teleport back, right? I use my rewind ability. And you just do it, right? You roll the die, and it just happens. The skill is more in the presentation. And so I think that's what's connecting with people. And I think that's why we're having another cultural moment for a game that's 44 years old now. You don't get many of those. It's not often you get something that's 44 years old that's having its another moment to really shine. And so I think all those things coming together means this feels like an incredibly important but fragile time to me. That D&D's prospering, and the why we're working so hard is because we want it to get even bigger and better and more people playing. Because I genuinely feel like when I walked around and saw all those people playing video games in this very intense but stressed position, that people need role-playing games in their lives. That if you play a role-playing game, you're just going to be happier. Just strictly happier. I mean, unless you have awful people you're playing with, then don't play the game with awful people. Go find your friends, go find people you get along with. But if you play a role-playing game once a week, I'm 100% convinced you will have a more enjoyable, happier, healthier life. They're good for you. Socializing is good for you. Human beings, Homo sapiens, we're a social creature. This is what we're made for. We're made to gather in tribes. We're made to gather around the fire and share stories. We're made to laugh. We're made to have those moments of drama and story. Storytelling is the entire foundation of our culture. Story is everything. I mean, everything's a story, right? That's what we use to transfer information. That's how we preserve everything. And so I think D&D is really tapping into something that I think is kind of, for a lot of people, has been neglected for a long time. There's not a lot of things in their lives that give them this outlet. And what's been great about it is it's now more accessible than ever. And I think that's really what is fueling everything we're doing, is that kind of emotional need, but combined with this sense that, hey, I can do that. I don't need a gatekeeper to let me in. I can just grab my own starter set or grab the free rules off online and just run it myself. I just find 2, 3, 4 other people who want to try this, and we can just do it. And I think that's really empowering.
Thank you, Mike Mearls, for being on D&D Beyond. I am your host, Todd Kenrick. Thank you for watching.